Morning. This meeting of the Honorable Senate for Friday, March 14th, 2025 is called to order. Before we begin the business of the day, 5 of our members have asked to join by Zoom, and I ask for your agreement with respect to them. Senators Morris, Senator Professor Morris, Senator Crawford, Senator Scott Motley, and Senator Allen have all sought to join by Zoom. Do I have your approval in relation to that? Thank you. Welcome to the senators who are joining us virtually. Happy that you could do so. Unfortunately, I understand that some of you are unable to attend in person. And before we begin to get into the business of the day, I'm pleased to announce that we will be swearing in a new senator today in the personage of Ambassador Audrey Patricia Marks, former ambassador to the United States of America and permanent representative to the Organization of American States. She's also someone who, aside from her diplomatic career, enjoyed a career in the private sector in various capacities, and someone who is well known to most of us who operate within the private sector. Mr. Clark.
Ambassador Audrey Patrice Marks.
Okay. I, Audrey Patrice Marks, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Jamaica, and that I will uphold and defend the Constitution and the laws of Jamaica, and that I will conscientiously and impartially discharge my responsibilities to the people of Jamaica. So help me God.
As in the normal course of things, a number of persons have come to support the new senator, and I just want to welcome them, and I do so individually. Madison Dunstan, Captain Michael Fisher, Jean Laura Chin, my very good friend. It take this to bring you down here. Moses Jackson, Dr. Lorna Simmons, Natalie St. Louis, and Dr. Diana Davis, welcome to the Parliament. And just recognize that you're all always welcome. It doesn't take Audrey Marks to bring you down here. You're always welcome to come. As you know, it's part of the democratic process that you are experiencing, and it's always nice for you to come in person so that we can interact with you as citizens of this country. So thank you very much. Statements by ministers. Statements by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate are the following: Economic and Fiscal Report of the Independent Fiscal Commission for the financial year 2025-2026, Annual Report on Audited Financial Statements of the Ports Management and Security Limited for the financial year 2020-2021, Annual Report on Audited Financial Statements of the Postal Corporation of Jamaica for the financial year 2022-2023, the Segregated Accounts Companies Forms Regulations 2025 under the Segregated Accounts Companies Act, Ministry Paper number 9 of 2025 entitled Revenue Measures for the Financial Year 2025-2026, amendments to page 6 of Ministry Paper number 9 of 2025 entitled Revenue Measures for the Financial Year 2025-2026, Annual Report of the National Education Trust for the financial year 2015-2016 rather, the Auditor General's Department Certified Appropriations Accounts, head 72,000, under the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development for the year 2022-2023. And by way of information, report of the Standing Finance Committee of the whole House of Representatives, consisting of all members of the House.
Thank you very much. And on the issue of announcements, I'm going to ask the newly sworn-in Senator Audrey Marks just to respond at this time and ask leaders on both sides to comment thereafter. Senator.
Okay.
Senator Marks.
Thank you, Mr. President, leader of government business, leader of business, of opposition business, fellow members of this chamber. Thank you for your warm welcome. It is a pleasure to be here and to, again, be called into service. I want to thank the Prime Minister for his commitment to this country and his vision and his leadership, and to also express my appreciation to serve with him in this capacity. I want to thank my family. JD and Madison Dunstan is here, and friends already acknowledged. Thank you for always making the time, even on short notice. I appreciate you all. Mr. President, I just want to say it's a special pleasure and an inspiration for me to be here with you today, because I've seen where so many of you, despite having full-time jobs otherwise, made the time and the sacrifice to be here in the Senate to serve our country. And it has inspired me to know that this is something that I can join you in doing. I think we're at a pivotal point in our country. A strong foundation has been laid. And now as we pivot for growth, it's a time that I'm excited to join you in looking at how we can support an infrastructure of legislation to drive growth and drive our economy forward. And I hope to use all that I've learned over the years, all my experience and qualifications, to support this, to serve in this chamber. Opposition members here, thank you for making the time. And, you know, Senator Bunting, you're my good friend from a long time. I look forward to... And I look forward, I know that sometimes the thing is to be opposition. I look forward to collaboration and to working very closely with you all as we push Jamaica forward. I'll just share one thing, you know, yesterday as I was coming home and the plane was flying over Jamaica. We were about to be landing, and the sun was setting. And I thought, what a beautiful country. It's truly the jewel of the Caribbean. And, and I was awed, and again, such a pleasure to be a citizen of this country. And so, and a privilege. And so I'm very blessed to serve, and I sincerely look forward to working with all of you, and I look forward to your support, and ready to go. Thank you.
Minister.
Mr. President, it gives me great pleasure to know that today I continue to work in a seamless manner with former ambassador to the U.S. and permanent representative to the OAS, the Honorable Audrey Marks, who has been serving Jamaica in a particular capacity for just close to a decade. Ambassador Marks, or Senator Marks, has not only leaned on an extremely successful career in the private sector, and I know her to be someone who is phenomenally skilled in the art of negotiation. She is committed to Jamaica. She has a love for country and an ability to not only organize, but to see how things can be done differently and better. And to bring not only her private sector experience, but her general leadership and international experience to the space of the Senate and to the debates of the Senate, I think will undoubtedly enrich all of our sittings with further perspectives and, of course, deep knowledge and patriotism. So, Mr. President, it is with a full heart that today I join, or I say on behalf of my colleagues on this side, that we wholeheartedly welcome the Prime Minister's appointment and welcome Senator Audrey Patrice Marks to our ranks today, and we look forward to serving with her in this chamber. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Bunting.
Thank you, Mr. President. I took a few minutes to reacquaint myself with the new Senator Audrey Marks, who I have known for so long that if I was to say so, somebody would probably stand on a point of order and say that I'm misleading the Senate. But we have known each other for decades, and I am very familiar with her entrepreneurial skill and pursuits. And she was truly an innovator in the Jamaican financial sector, and particularly the payment subsector. And we interacted considerably in those days, and I respect her as an entrepreneur, I respect her as an innovator, and I anticipate that she will bring a level of decorum to the Senate that is appropriate, especially given her extensive diplomatic experience. And so, while protocol dictates that you always welcome whoever is sent, in this case, I can genuinely welcome. I can genuinely welcome, feeling absolutely no hypocrisy, the new senator, and look forward to reacquainting myself with her on a regular basis every Friday. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Bunting. And of course, Senator Marks, you and I have had a long relationship as well, going back many, many years. So it's lovely to see you back in Jamaica, continuing to contribute to the development of this Jamaica land we love. So welcome. The staff are here. Members of our support team are all here to assist you if at any time you need assistance. We're always here to respond to your requirements. So thank you very much for accepting the position, and we look forward to service in this chamber for as long as you desire. Bills brought from the Honorable House of Representatives. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Jamaica Teaching Council Act 2025.
Questions and answers to questions?
Mr. President, there are questions on the order paper standing in the name of Senator Floyd Morris. He is not here today, but he is present online, and I know he has long awaited these questions, or rather these answers. So I would, they have been sent to him by email. I would wish to read them into the record. He may ask the questions as he would wish while present, or of course, could choose to ask questions at the next sitting if he finds that there are any follow-ups to be requested.
Yeah, I know that he had joined the committee meeting, but I believe that he said he had to leave, so he might be off. Senator Morris, are you hearing us? He may be off. So you wish to put the answers on the record and then follow up if necessary? Perhaps that's the best thing to do. Yeah, okay, you could do that, Minister. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the questions and answers are as follows. Are you aware that the National Housing Trust is building a new office complex in Maypen, Clarendon? Answer, the National Housing Trust is in the final stage of constructing a new branch office on lands owned by the NHT at 34 Manchester Avenue, Maypen, Clarendon. The project is to deliver a two-story office building with a total floor area of 23,842 square feet. Associated infrastructure will include sewage treatment system, driveway, parking lot, and standby generator. Second, can you please indicate who is the contractor for this project? The contractor on the project is Buildright Construction Company Limited. 3, can you please indicate the duration and total amount of the contract? The original contract was for a duration of 24 months, subject to provisions of the contract approved for approved extension of time. The project commenced on November 19, 2019. The contract value is an amount of $604,299,077.28. Can you please indicate when this project will be completed? Answer, works are 91% complete. Building works are scheduled to be completed by the end of June 2025. A critical component of the sewage system is projected to be commissioned, however, in September 2025. Delays in the implementation of the works were related to factors such as the COVID-19 pandemic, suspension of works due to sewage seepage, and boundary alignment disputes. Extensions have been granted as a result of same. Can you please indicate where the Clarendon office of the NHT is currently located? The NHT currently leases 7 shops with a combined floor area of 6,500 square feet in the Glenmuir Business Centre at 55 Manchester Avenue, Maypen. 6, can you please indicate who is the owner of this property where the office is located? The current office spaces are leased from the registered proprietor, Mr. Owen Campbell. 7, can you please indicate what is the cost for rent per month for this location? The NHT maintains a monthly rental of $615,000 plus GCT for the 7 shops in total.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Bunting.
Mr. President, through you, I think since Senator Morris had indicated that he had duties at the UN, and because of the time differences, it probably does not allow him to follow up. If he's still not online, I would ask that he be allowed to follow up with questions at the next sitting.
The Minister had indicated that prior, but you put it on the record. We don't have a problem with that. That's it, Minister? Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sitting of the Senate. Motions for leave to introduce bills. The presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained. Public business, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, today the work before us is set out on the agenda. We will take the Procurement Act, the Procurement Amendment Act, the Bretton Woods Amendment Act, and the Tax Administration of Jamaica Amendment Act. It is proposed that I will just take the act to amend the Bretton Woods Agreement now, up front, and then Minister Hill, who is piloting the other two, will proceed with those.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today to pilot the bill entitled An Act to Amend the Bretton Woods Agreement Act. This bill seeks to allow for the exemption of locally recruited employees of the World Bank from payment of income tax. Mr. President, by way of background, the Bretton Woods Agreement Act, that is a principal act, incorporates into domestic law the articles of agreement which govern the operation of the international multilateral arrangements to establish the International Monetary Fund and the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, also known as the World Bank. Mr. President, the Bretton Woods Agreement Act has been the only instrument governing Jamaica's relationship with the bank since Jamaica became a member of the World Bank Group in 1963. And among the matters addressed by the Principal Act is the tax treatment of locally recruited staff of the bank. But it does not, and this is the reason we are here, provide for their tax exemption. Mr. President, in 1993, the Jamaican government entered into an establishment agreement with the World Bank to operationalize its office in Kingston. The 1993 agreement, however, incorporated tax exemption provisions taken from the 1947 United Nations Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of Specialized Agencies, provisions which were not in our Act. This made the tax treatment of Jamaican nationals employed to the bank unclear, as the agreement was now in conflict with the Principal Act. So the bill before us seeks to resolve this matter, Mr. President, by amending the Bretton Woods Agreement Act to incorporate the tax exemption provisions included in the 1993 agreement. The income tax exemption will therefore now not only be granted to foreign World Bank officials, but to Jamaican nationals, so as to give effect to the relevant provisions of the 1947 United Nations Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of Specialized Agencies. Mr. President, this bill is not a lengthy one. It only has two clauses. Clause 1 is the short title and addresses the preliminary issue that it should be read and construed as one with the Bretton Woods Agreement Act, hereinafter, of course, referred to as the Principal Act. And Clause 2 provides that Clause 2A and B of the bill renumber Section 5 of the Principal Act to include a new subsection 2 and a new subsection 3, which provide respectively that no tax shall be levied on or in respect of salaries and emoluments paid by the bank to executives, directors, alternates, officials, or employees of the bank who are citizens of Jamaica, and that the tax exemption granted shall not apply to a person who is employed to the bank in a category that receives hourly wages, or a person who is employed to the bank in the category of a consultant or contractor. So, of course, generally, persons who work hourly wage, are consultants or contractors, are usually in that category of persons who are responsible for their own tax arrangements. But beyond that, Mr. President, this aligns with the UN General Assembly Resolution 76-1 of the 7th of December, 1946, wherein it was recognized and adopted by the General Assembly that hourly paid staff, consultants, and contractors are not among the workers that are granted tax exemptions under the UN Convention on Privileges and Immunities. So, Mr. President, the bill is a simple one. It seeks to clarify the unsettled circumstances or the unsettled position created by the Establishment Agreement of 1993 by amending the Principal Act to provide for tax exemptions essentially to all World Bank employees, save those who are responsible for their own tax arrangements, that is, hourly consultants and contractors. In this context, I invite all members to support this bill and to contribute to what is undoubtedly a positive intent, and that is to ensure that Jamaican employees of the bank get the same benefit as those who are employed from overseas. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I look forward to the debate.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Bunting.
Thank you, Mr. President. As the Minister has outlined, this is really just tidying up legislation, and it's not controversial, and the opposition has no objection, and certainly we will support it.
Thank you very much, Minister.
To ask whether anyone had wished to gild Senator Bunting's lily. All right, thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you, colleagues. I would ask for a second reading of the bill. Thank you.
The question is that the bill be read for a second time. Those in favor? Against? Mr. Clark?
An act to amend the Bretton Woods Agreement Act to exempt locally recruited employees of the World Bank from the payment of income tax, read a second time.
Thank you very much. The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill clause by clause. Members, I put clause 1. Those in favor? Aye. Against? I put clause 2. Those in favor? Aye. Against? I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Aye. Against? The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Those in favor? Aye.
Mr. President, I ask for third reading of the bill.
Members would have heard the question. Those in favor? Aye. Against? I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment.
An act to amend the Bretton Woods Agreement Act to exempt locally recruited employees of the World Bank from the payment of income tax, read a third time and passed.
Thank you, Minister.
Mr. President, in the spirit of seamlessness, Senator Hill has just re-entered the chamber in perfect timing to start the bills which he has committed to pilot today. I believe he has determined to start with the Tax Administration Jamaica Amendment and then to proceed from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister Hill.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you, Leader, for
Mr. Clark.
making these arrangements so those can go underneath. And the first one I'm going to take, Mr. President, is really a quite simple one. It's the Tax Administration Jamaica Amendment Act 2025. The memorandum of objects and reasons makes it absolutely clear, and so won't need much of my time on my feet. It says, having been found in practice to be cumbersome, excessive, and inefficient, a decision has been taken to enact legislation to amend the Tax Administration Jamaica Act to remove the requirement for the advisory committee constituted under subparagraph 3 and 4 of the first schedule. The bill seeks to give effect to that decision, and what is really being removed, Mr. President, is the advisory committee consisted of required members from the Jamaica Confederation of Trade Unions, the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce, Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, Jamaica Maintenance Association, rather Manufacturers Association, and the body appearing to the minister to represent micro, small, and medium-sized business enterprises. In a day, in an information age, Mr. President, when you can get pretty much all that information digitally and straightforward, the staff of the ministry, and clearly the minister has determined, as I've seen in other places, that such an advisory committee that really has no governance statutory authority will be removed, and it's, I submit that for approval by the Senate, and I ask for approval from the body. Is there a second reading?
Senator Bunting.
Similarly, Mr. President, this is a really non-controversial, and we have no objection to it being passed.
Minister Hill. I don't think there's any other contribution, so the question is, the question is that the bill be read for a second time. Those in favor?
Second reading, yeah.
Against? Mr. Clark?
An act to amend the Tax Administration Jamaica Act, read a second time.
The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill clause by clause. Thank you very much. Members, I put clause 1 and 2. Those in favor? Aye. Against? I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Aye. Against? The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Those in favor? Aye. Against? I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Minister?
Mr. President, I ask for the third reading of the bill.
Thank you very much, Minister. The question is that the bill be read. The question is that the bill shortly entitled the Tax Administration Jamaica Amendment Act 2025 be read for a third time. Those in favor? Aye. Against?
An act to amend the Tax Administration Jamaica Act, read a third time and passed.
Minister.
Mr. President, thank you very much. Again,
Minister
as the chairman of the Cabinet Infrastructure Committee, I'm particularly pleased to be leading this debate on the amendment to the Procurement Act. Mr. President, the Procurement Act, which was passed in 2015, was brought into effect by appointed day notice along with the Public Procurement Amendment Act 2018 on April 1, 2019. This rather complex piece of legislation has had a quite long and circuitous route through an extensive gestation period to eventual promulgation. Also promulgated were the Public Procurement Regulations, the Public Procurement Review and Reconsideration Regulation, and the Public Procurement Registration and Classification of Suppliers Regulation. Mr. President, the bringing into effect of these pieces of legislation, amendments and regulations marked a significant milestone in the public procurement landscape in Jamaica. These amended laws and regulations in a multifaceted tool, or rather is a multifaceted tool, which anchors and enables the reform of public procurement in this country. Essentially, Mr. President, an outdated and fragmented legislative framework was replaced with this eventually updated and comprehensive law that contains provisions reflective of current policy thinking and good practice. The law established a new institutional framework with respective powers and scope of authority to bolster the attainment of the fairness objective and serve as a source of corruption deterrence. It also promotes economic development through transparent and efficient procedures that enable increased participation and the upholding of value for money in public expenditure. Mr. President, the Procurement Act, which came into being in 2015, has proven to be a difficult piece of legislation to navigate in procuring products and services for government entities, even if in concept it was necessary. Many have complained quite bitterly, vociferously, publicly, and very often that it appears that the Procurement Act of 2015 seemed to have been based on the premise that all Jamaicans are not honest, while waving the banner of value for money and transparency. Mr. President, on a recent morning radio program, I listened to the announcer name the 14 steps listed in a public procurement handbook that have to be followed to complete a procurement exercise. The list ranged from preparing the procurement plan to listing of conflict of interest situations, vetting the evaluation criteria, to record keeping. It's a formidable and long process, Mr. President. Many Jamaicans make the argument that this really quite draconian procurement process, draconian to their view, that was passed into law has been as much as an hindrance to the procurement and development process as it has been useful in securing value for money. Again, Mr. President, many Jamaicans cite our period of bad public governance and the lack of prudence which preceded and strongly influenced the Procurement Act of 2015. Public Procurement Amendment Bill 2025. Mr. President, the preamble of the bill sets out the statutory context within which we're seeking to promulgate the bill. We then come to the enacting provision, Mr. President, and move on to Clause 1, which sets out the name of the bill. Clause 2, Mr. President, has reconciled definitions for key terms used in the bill according to the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, UNCITRAL, Model Law on Public Procurement, and Usual Procurement Practice. These terms are bidding document, call-off contract, competition threshold, level of competition, open international competition, open national competition, restricted competition, and solicitation document. Consequent, Mr. President, we have deleted the definitions for bid, bidding documents, international competitive bidding, invitation to bid, national competitive bidding, open bidding, procurement method threshold, sector committee, and standard bidding document. Clause 3, Mr. President, speaks to the amendment of Section 4, subsection 3 of the Act, which essentially removes procuring entities unnecessary administrative requirements of obtaining the prior approval of the Chief Public Procurement Policy Officer to negotiate and execute the procurement of goods, services, or works exempted from the procurement methods and processes, services or works falling within the first schedule. Clause 4 sets out that Section 7, subsection 1, E of the Principal Act is amended to reflect the new nomenclature for bidding document. The term bidding should, as far as possible, be confined to procurement methods such as restricted bidding and open bidding. As there are other methods, the documents that are used are collectively described as solicitation documents. The Office of Public Procurement Policy is therefore responsible for developing solicitation documents, standard forms of contracts, pre-qualification documents, and any other public procurement related documents for use by procurement entities. Clause 5, Mr. President, provides that Section 11, subsection 1 of the Principal Act is amended to reflect that the Public Procurement Commission, the PPC, as one of its functions, approves and endorses the award of contracts of a value above the Tier 1 limit. We have deleted paragraph G, which requires the PPC to establish, maintain, and register the sector committee's activities and to examine and consider their recommendations. With this deletion, Mr. President, paragraphs H and I have been renumbered to paragraphs G and H. So, Mr. President, we wish to abolish effectively sector committees, in keeping with the Cabinet Infrastructure Committee's recommendation. And I must tell you, Mr. President, as chairman of that Cabinet subcommittee, I have to, at this point, give some substantial credit to former Minister Everett Warmington, who constantly worked on making sure that the procurement exercise that we follow becomes efficient while at the same time protecting the value for money proposition and providing good governance. So the removal of the sector committee, which he and us in the committees didn't see as adding anything much of value, is a good development. Recall, Mr. President, that sector committees were established by the PPC to assist in the review of contract award recommendations and have over time evolved into specialist committees. The Commission has now grown in respect of its technical experience and competence to review the related subjects. And in an effort to reduce regulatory duplication, which is what was happening, I think, with the sector committee, it is prudent for us to repeal sections 13 and 14 of the Act, which enable the PPC to establish sector committees to assist in the examination of tender reports for certain contracts. Clauses 6 and 7 treat with this repeal of sector committees. Clause 8, Mr. Speaker, speaks to deleting particular words in Section 15, subsection 1 and subsection 3 of the Principal Act and substituting them with the proper terms of art relevant to procurement practice. In particular, we wish to use the phrase submit bids instead of present bids. In Section 15, Section 1, or rather Section 15, subsection 1, and in subsection 3, we wish to use the term open international competition instead of international competitive bidding under Section 23, and competition threshold instead of procurement method threshold. Open international competition is a new concept that refers to unrestricted solicitation that commences with the publication of a notice of procurement opportunities in the international and local media. Similarly, Mr. President, competition threshold is a new concept which enables a toolbox approach of effecting procurement, which ensures that multiple methods of procurement are available in all circumstances. That is, Mr. President, regardless of the method of procurement for efficiency, a procuring entity may derogate from the highest level of competition and restrict participation to particular suppliers that are selected in non-discriminatory manner. Clause 9, Mr. President, provides for the deletion of the heading Part 3, Methods of Public Procurement, and insertion of new sections 22A and 22B in the Principal Act. The related Part 3, Method of Public Procurement and Levels of Competition, sets out open bidding, restricted bidding, single source procurement, requests for proposals without negotiation, requests for proposals with consecutive negotiations, and requests for quotations as the range of procurement methods that can be deployed by procuring entities. Entities may also use a framework agreement procedure in accordance with Section 25F of the Principal Act. Mr. President, there are circumstances in which open bidding is unsuitable, requiring the deployment of alternative methods of procurement. These methods are to be used according to stipulated preconditions and distinct practical steps that differ from open bidding. The current law inappropriately conflates these methods, ultimately resulting in unworkable provisions that cannot reasonably be followed by procurement practitioners nor suppliers. In this regard, Mr. President, Clause 10 treats with amending Section 23(1), 2, and 3 and requires a clear record of the reasons for procuring entities, derogation from methods other than open competition. This record must be kept and form part of the procurement records of the procuring entity. Clause 11, Mr. President, deals with amendment of Section 24 of the Principal Act. Throughout this section, all references to restricted bidding are replaced with restricted competition. Restricted competition refers to solicitation that is limited to the participation of a selected supplier or selected suppliers which are selected in a non-discriminatory manner. Clause 12 proposes, Mr. President, amendments to Section 25 by inserting the requirements that single-source procurement is to be used by a procuring entity that is desirous of procuring goods, services, and works from another procuring entity. Mr. President, Section 25F, which treats with framework agreement, is amended by renumbering and inserting subsections 2 to 4, and as stated in Clause 13. While the current legislation now provides for the use of open and closed framework agreements, it is silent on the mechanism for approval of framework agreements and call-offs made thereunder. This results in uncertainty over whether it is the framework agreement, Mr. President, itself or individual contracts that are to be approved by Tier 2 or Tier 3 approving authorities. In this regard, Section 25F is amended to enable the procuring entity to make a reasonable projection of the aggregate estimated value of anticipated call-offs contracts to be raised under the contemplated framework agreement. Thereafter, Mr. President, where the estimated value of these call-offs contracts exceed the Tier 1 limit, approval must be sought from the Tier 2 or Tier 3 approval authorities, as the case may be, prior to admitting any supplier to such a framework. It would therefore be disallowed for a procuring entity to exceed the limits of the framework agreement. Practically speaking, Mr. President, projection of the aggregate estimate value or aggregate estimated value of anticipated call-offs should therefore be done at the planning and approval stages and must contemplate the entire value of these contracts over the life of the framework agreement. Mr. President, participation in procurement proceedings as set out in Section 31 of the Principal Act is amended by deleting and substituting with subsections 31(1) and 2, which A, prohibit a procuring entity from limiting the participation of persons, firms, or entities in procurement proceedings that are discriminatory unless authorized by the Procurement Act, its regulations, or any other law. And B, allows for the application of prescribed special and differential treatment measures. Mr. President, clauses 15 and 16 outline amendments to Section 34 and 41 of the Principal Act by replacing all references to presenting or presented bids with submitting or submitted bids. This coheres with procurement terms of art. Mr. President, I wish to advise that this Honorable Senate that the amendment of Section 43 is intended to properly situate the application of the standstill provision. The standstill provision, Mr. President, is a period of time during which an aggrieved bidder will be given an opportunity to make an application for review of the final decision of a procuring entity. It is meant to further objectify of fairness that is enshrined within the law. However, Mr. President, its current application in the law is all contracts, regardless of the value, poses a challenge to procurement efficiency. That efficiency is now placed into consideration. While a bidder, in other words, in the past, we'd go for value for money, make sure we follow the rules, 14 or 15 of them. We're now making sure that, yeah, you follow the rules. We might cut them down from 14 to something else, but you must make sure it's efficient. While a bidder has a constitutional right to fair, equitable, and humane treatment by public authority in the exercise of any functions, it is not clear that the obligation of fair, equitable treatment requires a standstill, Mr. President. All procedures and rules related to treatment of bidders are already properly balanced to achieve those objectives. Additionally, the legislation now allows procuring entities the opportunity to proceed without standstill, suggesting that bidders do not have to benefit from standstill in all circumstances. The standstill is therefore to be regarded as a fail-safe, and to this end only needs to be applied proportionately and in a manner that makes the legislation pragmatic and workable. Mr. President, to apply standstill invariably to contracts regardless of value results in undue and unnecessary administrative burden and delay, the very things we're trying to wipe out of the procurement arrangements in this country. In this regard, Mr. President, Section 43 and 44 are amended to require the application of the standstill only to contracts above the low dollar value threshold and to make modifications to the point at which standstill would apply. In the case of Tier 1 limit, standstill applies upon the procuring entity's determination of a successful bidder, and the case of the Tier 2 limit or Tier 3 limit. Standstill will now apply where the procuring entity has determined a successful bidder and the Commission has approved or endorsed the award of contracts. Further, Mr. President, Section 44 is amended to provide expressly that if a bidder's request for reconsideration of review of results in a change of the successful bidder, then the procuring entity must issue a new standstill period, and the recommendation for award of the successful bidder must again be submitted for approval in accordance with the Act. This amendment, Mr. President, is outlined in Clause 18. With regards to the supplementary provisions relating to the review board proceedings, Clause 19 sets out that Section 53 of the Act is amended to primarily reflect that Procurement Review Board must give notice to any person it determines entitled to participate in review proceedings along with the applicant and the PPC. Mr. President, Clause 20 sets out that Section 61, Roman numeral 1, is amended to ensure consistency of the terms of our solicitation documents and the standard forms of contracts, and that the Minister of Finance has powers under the Act to make regulations treating with these procurement-related documents. That gives the Minister the power to do what adds to efficiency while making sure we stay within the rules. Mr. President, the first schedule of the Principal Act has been repealed and replaced with a current and updated listing of certain exempt goods, works, and services from the procurement methods and processes. Parts 3 and 5, that's Roman numeral 3 and Roman numeral 5, do not apply to the following goods, works, and services. A, non-governmental organization under the conditions specified in Part B of the schedule. B, land or any immovable property or rights in relation thereto. C, works of art, cultural performances, products or services associated with creative expression. D, Mr. President, goods, works, and services relating to the staging of productions in support of or associated with creative expression and cultural events, including, but not limited to, Roman numeral 1, artistic coordination, direction, and management. Roman numeral 2, the management of artistic works or events. Roman numeral 3, the management of intellectual property rights. Roman numeral 4, venue, rental. Number 5, Roman numeral 5, infrastructure and technical effects. Roman numeral 6, design and technical director of cultural performances. Roman numeral 7, Mr. President, the engagement of artists and performers. And then we go to section E, medical services. F, legal services. G, medallions and insignias for use pursuant to the National Honors and Awards Act. H, Mr. President, goods, works, and services of a sensitive nature for use in or acquisition for the purposes of national defense or national security. Mr. President, also included will be I, services, travel services, and hotel accommodations or facilities. J, Mr. President, contracts for broadcasting time. K, program, material intended for broadcasting by broadcasters. L, Mr. President, goods, works, services under multilateral or bilateral agreements to which Jamaica is a party, or an agreement between Jamaica and an international organization providing for an alternative system of procurement than that which is provided under the Act. M, Mr. President, educational instruction and training programs. N, goods, works, or services relating to or connected with the operations of Jamaican diplomatic missions or consulates. O, Mr. President, co-sponsorship arrangements, trade, travel, and roadshows and cooperative advertisement. P, Mr. President, the procurement of banknotes and coins for issue by the Bank of Jamaica. Q, the implementation of the Bank of Jamaica of monetary policy and foreign exchange policy through financial contracts. R, Mr. President, is financial advisory services procured from the International Finance Corporation in respect of road development projects in Jamaica. S, Mr. President, says for technical cooperation and assistance for the provision of goods, works, and services pursuant to any agreement between the Government of Jamaica through Jamaica Special Economic Zone Authority and the Government of the Republic of Singapore through the Singapore Cooperation Enterprise related to or connected with the implementation of the Jamaica Logistics Hub Initiative. T, Mr. President, says group life insurance or group health insurance. U, goods, works, and services required during a situation of emergency or extreme urgency, notice in relation to the acquisition of which is published in accordance with paragraph 3. Mr. President, V says fiscal agency or depository services, and W says services related to the sale, redemption, and distribution of public debt. X, Mr. President, denotes national level financial transactions. Y, the employment in the public service pursuant to a contract of service or a contract for services. And Z, Mr. President, goods, works, or services provided by a foreign government or any foreign organization declared by the minister to be a government or organization providing technical assistance to Jamaica. So, Mr. President, the first schedule also included definitions for specific terms used in the bill, such as Broadcasting International Finance Corporation, Jamaica Logistics Hub Initiative, and travel services. The first schedule, Mr. President, is amended to provide for procurement during situations of emergency or extreme urgency, which necessitates the award of a procurement contract referred to as an emergency contract. The procuring entity is required to give a detailed notice to the public of all emergency contracts awarded by that entity. The amendments, Mr. President, to the emergency provisions also recognize that emergency procurement procedures will apply upon a declaration of a state of disaster under any law or a period of public emergency. Such declaration, Mr. President, will allow for the formation of procurement contracts to ensure the preservation of life and public property. Mr. President, Part B of the Schedule B is amended to reconcile the conditions for exemption of goods, works, and services donated to the Government of Jamaica by a non-governmental organization under Part A. The second schedule of the Principal Act, Mr. President, is amended to reflect a revision in the Constitution of the Public Procurement Commission and its chairman's tenure of office. Mr. President, I would like to reiterate the importance the government attaches to amend the Public Procurement Act. It is necessary to A, correct conceptual and fundamental deficiencies in the Act, B, to clarify the law with respect to methods of public procurement, approvals, and value limits established under the Act. C, it's to repeal provisions pertaining to sector committees. D, introduce the concept of levels of competition in public procurement. And, Mr. President, E, provide for additional works, goods, and services to be exempt from the generally applicable public procurement processes under the Act. Naturally, Mr. President, we live in a dynamic world. Commerce is dynamic, trade is dynamic, and it will clearly, there will be new amendments in due course. That will happen. But for now, Mr. President, the promulgation of the Public Procurement Amendment Bill will significantly advance this government's reform agenda and transform very positively the public procurement landscape in Jamaica. I therefore ask that this Honorable Senate pass this bill, if it pleases you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ministerial. And I noticed that there is
an amendment. Yes.
Yes.
There are two amendments that I will read into the record, Mr. President. The first one is in Clause 2, Paragraph B, delete the new definition, open national competition, which I referred to in the submission I made, but here it is in the amendment, open national competition, and substitute therefore the following. Open national competition means a procurement opportunity for participation by any approved registered suppliers or approved unregistered suppliers that are tax compliant in Jamaica at the time of the bid submission deadlines. Clause 21, Mr. President, in paragraph 2, subsection 2A of Part capital A of the new first schedule, item A. The subparagraph in Roman numeral 2 delete the word or, and in B, in subparagraph Roman numeral 3, delete the word and substitute therefore the word or, and in C, Mr. President, insert next after the subparagraph Roman numeral 3 the following subparagraph Roman numeral 4, and Roman numeral 4 now reads, a disaster or an emergency declared by the minister with responsibility for promoting, or rather for procuring entity by notice published in the Gazette after consultation with the head of that procuring entity, and the quotation is closed at "and." Those are the suggested amendments, Mr. President, if it pleases you.
Thank you very much, Minister Hill and Senator Bunting.
Yes, debate, sorry. Oh, we have that matter, yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Hill, you need not worry, I won't detain you long. You will be able to quickly get to that second reading. But I just a few remarks, Mr. President. It's not often that I find myself agreeing with Senator Hill on issues around bills, but as both of us come from similar private sector backgrounds, I very much appreciate the damage that unnecessary bureaucratic delays and administrative bottlenecks does to the productivity of our economy. And particularly, although we're speaking to regulations and laws and rules relating to the public sector, it impacts the private sector. And so it is impatient of debate that anything that we can do to expedite and streamline this process is worthy of support. Just last week or the week before, I believe it was, we had bipartisan agreement at the level of the Joint Select Committee reviewing the Integrity Commission Act that one of the best things that you can do to ensure, well, to promote probity in public life and procurement in particular is transparency, publishing all the contracts and approvals and so on that are issued by the public sector on a regular basis on an easily accessible vehicle such as a website. And the Contractor General, or the Office of the Contractor General, used to do that. I believe it was either on a monthly or quarterly basis. And based on what I think was a rather restrictive interpretation of the Integrity Commission Act, the Integrity Commission, which incorporated the whole Office of the Contractor General, decided that this clause, a particular clause, prevented them from doing that. And I was encouraged that we had bipartisan support at the Joint Select Committee. They said this was never the intention of the bill. It wasn't the understanding of either side when the debate was taking place in the House or when the bill was being drafted that should prevent the publication in the normal course of business, just administrative publication of contracts and approvals awarded by government. Now, the area of public procurement is ripe for partisan attacks. But as a courtesy to my friend and new senator, I can assure I will restrain myself at this sitting. because I would not like that to be her first experience of the Senate. And in any event, I am not one of those who use the absolute privilege of Parliament to make potentially defamatory attacks. Any criticism I am prepared to make here, I am prepared to make on the political platform. And there will be many opportunities over the next few months on the political platform for us to do that. So I'm really continuing in the spirit of cooperation this morning, Senate Leader, and going to I have often been a lone voice on an issue of principle, whether or not I have support. But careful, you don't draw me tongue, come on. Careful, because, I am. But as I said earlier, it's impatient of debate that we need to remove as much of the bureaucratic delays and administrative bottlenecks as we can from the whole government administrative system, not simply procurement. And I would tell you, Senator Hill, it goes way back before. It didn't start at the Public Procurement Act of 2015. These attempts at putting, as you said, I think you referred to, the regulations treat everyone as if they're a criminal, or assumes that they have some kind of dishonest intent. And I think that is an attitude that we've taken in our public service going back decades. And I recall one of my first interaction with, what was it called, the public sector transformation, not in the current dispensation. This was actually started under Prime Minister Edward Seaga, I believe, in the 80s. And I met with former Auditor General Edwards at the time, who had now retired and had been put in charge of the reform, or leading that reform process, or reviewing it. And he had exactly the same remarks to make that you had. And this was in the late 80s. So it's not something new. But unfortunately, from time to time, incidents emerge that suggest that we need a fairly rigorous system to prevent abuse. The Shadow Minister of Finance, or the opposition spokesman of Finance, yesterday mentioned, I believe, that almost every year, the capital budget is unspent. I think he said it was something like 19 billion not spent or not expected to be spent in the current financial year. And a lot of that is just the project management, trying to get through all the various regulations and procedures in time. You mentioned, or the bill mentioned, that one of the objectives, this is in the Memorandum of Objects and Reasons, was to introduce a concept of levels of competition in public procurement. And this is something I support 100%, not just in terms of administrative efficiency, but I think we also want to do it to level the playing field, promote competition, allow small and medium players to become medium and large players over time. Whereas if we have a system that is so prohibitive or so restrictive by whatever means, whether by regulation or by edict, that it is only the entrenched players in the system who can meet the requirements, whether by the size of the bid bond or the performance bond or so on. And so it is important, this is a very important object. And again, one of the areas, of course, that I am familiar with is the financial sector. And I recall going back to my first stint in the House of Representatives in 1993 to 97. I recall asking a question of the then Minister of Finance, what was the average balance of the consolidated fund in a non-interest bearing account at a particular financial institution. And when the question was finally answered, this was asking, I was on the government side then, and I was asking the government, my own party's Minister of Finance. When they gave me the figure, and we multiplied that non-interest bearing balance in the consolidated fund account by the average treasury bill rate, it accounted for 100% of the profit of that particular commercial bank. If they did nothing else, if they just operated one current account, the government's consolidated fund account, they would make the profit that they were making at the time. And, you know, you would appreciate that also, having been in the sector, that the government is a big player. And if the government acts to consolidate and maintain duopoly or oligopoly, chances are it will remain. If the government deliberately tries to encourage competition and expand the market and lift up the smaller and medium players and ensure that you get, instead of oligopolistic or duopolistic competition, which is not real competition, you move closer to true competition, where you have many competent players of a reasonable size, so that ultimately the consumer will benefit from efficient pricing, and nobody will make extraordinary returns or above average returns consistently over time. So with those observations, and without commenting in detail on any of the issues, and I don't pretend to be a procurement specialist when I was in cabinet, a lot of the procurement for my ministry were exempt because of some of the same issues that you are talking about here. Then, generally speaking, national security does not tender publicly for a lot of the specialized equipment and so on. So I will accept you have been chairing it for some time, and you have experience, and the principle of reducing bureaucracy, the principle of encouraging competition, the principle of improving transparency and oversight. And to help do that, we need to strengthen the e-procurement systems, where a lot of this becomes online and can facilitate much more rapid and transparent bidding processes. All these we have no problem with, and we encourage the government to implement it so soon as possible for a more efficient and a growth economy rather than a pro-box economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bunting. Senator Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, our students in sixth form, in much the way that those of us who would have studied economics back in high school would have had it back then, as well as our university students, as they get introduced to course macroeconomics, usually after you take a semester in microeconomics. Those students, like many of us this morning, would have been taught that nominal gross domestic product, nominal GDP, Mr. President, is defined as, or the formula is expressed as C plus I plus G plus NX, or X minus M, if you may. In this expression, Mr. President, C denotes consumer spending. I denotes investments by businesses. G speaks to government spending. And NX, of course, denotes net exports. Essentially, exports minus imports. Public procurement, Mr. President, is about government spending. And as such, public procurement is one of the critical ways in which government impacts the national economy. I start here, Mr. President, because the Public Procurement Amendment Bill that is before us is not merely about the regime of rules governing procurement by the Jamaican state, but more importantly, the bill before us represents a critical pillar in the government's push to promote and enable more robust, accelerated, and sustained levels of economic growth. The Jamaican economy at present, sir, is stable. It may be described as being strong, and quite commendably, the Jamaican economy is resilient. Several key macroeconomic indicators are encouraging. Tax revenues are performing, so you can consider us as being buoyant in terms of revenues. Unemployment stands at record lows. Inflation is at the lower end of the targeted 4 to 6% band, the central bank target, that is. The Jamaican dollar is stable. We have record high foreign reserves. The benchmark interest rate is trending down, albeit not precipitously enough. Business and consumer confidence are high, and more money is in this year's budget to undertake programs as a result of lower interest payments on the debt. Notwithstanding a contraction in economic output, Mr. President, as a result of the passage of Hurricane Beryl and Tropical Storm Raphael, last year, Jamaica's economy is projected to return to growth in the first quarter of calendar year 2025. We have attained macroeconomic stability and fiscal discipline. And based on the presentation we saw in the House on Tuesday, the driver and the team he leads, with the finance minister in the mix, will not be stopping at all as it relates to fiscal discipline. With Jamaica's stock of debt moving from just over 120%, that being the ratio prevailing at the time when the Andrew Holness-led administration took office in March 2016, to the 68% we are programmed to end fiscal year 2024-2025 on, it is evident that we have done well to manage the numerator, the debt. What we're seeking to improve now, Mr. President, indeed, the subject of even more focused attention has to be the denominator. The denominator, of course, being gross domestic product, GDP. Mr. President, I stand this morning in support of this critical piece of legislation, which reflects some proposed amendments to the Public Procurement Act of 2015 in a bid to create the Public Procurement Amendment Act of 2025. Mr. President, this bill is timely, relevant, and consequential. It is of considerable moment. It is of considerable moment because it represents an important advance to a more accommodating, applicable, modern, fit-for-purpose, and growth-enabling and inducing regime governing public procurement, essentially the spending of taxpayers' money. Mr. President, I have taken particular note of the Memorandum of Objects and Reasons, especially the intent, as set out in the bill, to correct conceptual and fundamental deficiencies in the Public Procurement Act 2015. Also, the intent to introduce the concept of levels of competition and provide for exemption of additional works, goods, and services from the generally applicable public procurement processes under the Act. Mr. President, on Tuesday, the 18th of November, 2024, the Prime Minister, Dr. the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, presented in the reception area, the lobby, of the Office of the Prime Minister, a highly profound and timely policy statement in which he shared his administration's outlook on the next chapter in Jamaica's development. And he used that occasion, Mr. President, to telegraph that his administration is pivoting to promote and enable more robust, accelerated, and sustained economic growth. As many will recall, the acronym ASPIRE constitutes, represents the framework within which that pivot toward increased levels of economic growth is taking place. It is to be noted that the R in ASPIRE, Mr. President, speaks to reform of the bureaucracy. The bill before us this morning is part and parcel of that broader thrust and effort on the part of government to get out of the way even more, to roll out the red carpet even more, and do away with the red tape even more as we seek to reform bureaucracy and usher in conditions that will foster and bring about increased levels of economic growth in this country. So, Mr. President, I made mention of Tuesday, 18th November 2024. A couple of days after that, Thursday, 20th November 2024, the Prime Minister attended upon the Kingston Western Constituency Conference on the grounds of the Tivoli Gardens High School, and in lamenting the frustrating experiences associated with a low-income housing development in what is called Rasta City, a development conceptualized back in 2017, but was just essentially coming on stream in 2024 due to procurement and project implementation, bureaucratic red tape, and hurdles. Of course, we know that bureaucratic red tape and inefficiencies retard the pace of economic activity, and it serves to undermine growth. In his address, Mr. President, to the hundreds of party supporters gathered at the Kingston Western Constituency Conference, Prime Minister Holness, in reference to Jamaica, said, among other things, the following: "What is happening to us is that the laws that we create as a government to deal with issues of corruption, promote transparency, they are now becoming a constraint on the speed at which government can implement the projects which are funded from the dividends of good economic, fiscal management of the country. So even though our good fiscal management is generating the revenues, you have a big capital budget, but you are not seeing the impact of that budget quickly enough. The next chapter of Jamaica must be to tackle this monster of bureaucracy, which we have created, that is standing in the way of the quick utilization of the capital resources, the capital budget execution, and we cannot allow that to continue. We need to start to do business at the speed of thought. When we think about it, get it done. Right now, the thinking is, if it don't take long, it wasn't properly done. So in the next chapter, we are going to tackle bureaucracy. We are going to make the bureaucracy more efficient. And there are those who are thinking in the back of their mind that if you remove, streamline some of these laws, then what you're doing is facilitating corruption. The greatest error that we have made in this country is to believe that by fighting corruption, we increase efficiency. What we should have been doing is fighting inefficiency, and that will reduce corruption. So in our next phase, it is about getting our country efficient. It is about getting our country productive. And the bureaucracy is something that we must deal with. End of quote. Mr. President, the Prime Minister was speaking back in November 2024, as I indicated earlier. We are in March 2025 with this very important Public Procurement Amendment Act, or bill rather, before us. The bill being before us this morning, having been passed, of course, in the lower house, is the clearest indication yet that Jamaica is now well and truly in its next phase. Better days are coming by and by. And if there was any doubt, Mr. President, as to whether the Andrew Holness-led government was serious about tackling Jamaica's unwieldy, frustrating, and debilitating bureaucracy, the Prime Minister, speaking at the Jamaica Stock Exchange Investments and Capital Markets Conference on Tuesday, 21st January 2025, announced the establishment of the new Speed Task Force. The Speed Task Force, as I understand it anyway, will essentially serve as an efficiency program oversight committee. The Speed Task Force aims to reduce bureaucracy and enhance efficiency in the public sector. The acronym SPEED means streamlining processes for efficiency and economic development. Quoting the Prime Minister yet again, Mr. President, he said in his remarks to the attendees at the event, and I quote, "We are determined to end the outdated notion that efficiency compromises quality." End quote. The Speed Task Force will focus on identifying bottlenecks within existing processes, recommending actionable solutions, and delivering tangible outcomes within specified timelines. Mr. President, those of us who track the developments in the governance of the country and in the management of the nation's affairs will note, as did Senator Bunting moments ago, that For quite some time, we have had the repatriation of billions of dollars to the Consolidated Fund, which were previously earmarked for capital expenditure in a given fiscal year. Historically, this phenomenon has plagued both sides, as it has been the bane of the existence of successive political administrations over the years. As one who has served on a number of board of public bodies, I know all too well just how debilitating bureaucratic red tape can be for project implementation. Pre-procurement activities are extremely important, Mr. President. Sequencing of actions is advisable. The conventional wisdom, of course, is that if you queue up your activities and get all your proverbial ducks in a row vis-a-vis procurement, the public procurement process tends to be much more seamless and efficient. And so, in many respects, some of that quantum of funds that end up being repatriated to the Consol Fund because they were not essentially expended as intended in a given fiscal year, because for various reasons, for various challenges having to do with inefficiency, intended procurement, indeed intended projects, were not implemented, or at least the pace at which they were expected or envisaged to have been implemented did not quite materialize. This bill, Mr. President, will make PIMSEC function and attain the impact it was actually envisaged to have when it was conceptualized and created. Capacity building at both the operational level and the policy level are also vital. The critical importance of corporate governance, Mr. President, and public procurement training cannot be overemphasized, especially for newly constituted boards, particularly the boards of public bodies. New board members and indeed officers at the various ministries, departments, and agencies across government would do well with exposure to corporate governance training, with the appropriate levels of sensitization, and of course, public procurement training as well. I must use the platform this morning, Mr. President, to commend and stand in solidarity with the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service and several other entities which have distinguished themselves over the years in the provision of corporate governance training and public procurement training to help build capacity, to help ensure that boards, certainly directors of our public body boards, and officers, functionaries at the various ministries, departments, and agencies are imbued with the skill sets and with the knowledge that would help them to be more diligent and faithful as stewards as they superintend procurement activities, as they superintend projects, particularly projects that are consequential and meaningful in terms of the national development agenda. Persons functioning at both the policy and operational levels at our ministries, departments, and agencies across government need to understand that we move from a strategic corporate plan to a budget, and from a budget to a procurement plan. In far too many instances, Mr. President, we have glitches where these things are concerned. And auditors, including the Auditor General, have had to flag some public bodies, and even ministries, I dare say, in relation to this particular deficiency. So we need to make systems articulate and ensure, Mr. President, that we do not put the proverbial cart before the horse. That is how people get themselves in trouble and run into difficulties in undertaking procurement and or implementing projects. Mr. President, I am not oblivious to the extremely competitive nature of our politics in this country. I would like to throw out a caution to those who exhibit a propensity to and have a tendency of impugning the professionals in the public service in their bid to take swipes at their political adversaries. Mr. President, speaking at the PNP Divisional Conference in Junction, St. Elizabeth on Sunday, 16th June 2024, Senator Peter Bunting, in launching a spurious and baseless broadside against the government and the Spark program, described the much vaunted project as a quote-unquote con business. He said, and I quote, "That is the financing for the Labour Party in the upcoming election. Corruption. You mark my word, the JLP are going to yam out most of that money." How vulgar, Mr. President. How low. How desperate. Sometimes when people speak, Mr. President, what they're actually doing is projecting. And it's such a pity that Senator Safar is not in the chamber just now. But just to be clear, and it bears repeating, sometimes when folks speak, what they're actually doing is projecting. You're a false prophet, man. Be quiet.
Mr. Bunting.
You're a false prophet, man.
Hello,
Be
hello,
quiet.
man. Hello.
Mr. President, Bunting is a former PNP General Secretary. His immediate successor, Paul Burke, made reference to and made some clear intimations in relation to agents' fees back in 2016, following the PNP's defeat at the polls and the then unraveling PNP stolen campaign money scandal. To those, Mr. President, who live in a glass house, I commend the words immortalized in song by the late, great Peter Tosh. Don't throw stones. Mr. President, as Senator Bunting is fully aware, members of the political directorate do not have superintendents over the public procurement process, including, of course, the evaluation of bids, the selection of preferred bidders, and the awarding of contracts. Indeed, members of the political directorate would have erred and would be in serious trouble if they meddle and interfere with the public procurement process. Mr. President, there are appropriate mechanisms to ferret out interference and corruption on the part of members of the political directorate, and applicable, indeed appropriate sanctions are available as a remedy and should be imposed where interference and corruption are established. Applicable and appropriate sanctions may be legal in nature, they may be in the realm of the administrative, or indeed they may be political. The cases of Philip Paulwell and the EWI scandal, as well as Richard Azan and the Spalding's market scandal, are examples that readily come to mind. Interference in corruption processes, Senator Bunting. When certain politicians, Mr. President, in their vulgar and desperate pursuit of political one-upmanship, launch an assault and speak in reckless and disparaging ways regarding procurement and project implementation without supporting evidence, it should be understood that it is the professional men and women employed across the various ministries, departments, and agencies throughout government that are being impugned and ridiculed. I'm going to repeat that because it bears repeating. When misguided politicians, in their vulgar and desperate pursuit of political one-upmanship, launch an assault and speak in reckless and disparaging ways regarding procurement and project implementation without supporting evidence, it should be understood, Mr. President, that it is the professional men and women employed to the various ministries, departments, and agencies across government who are being impugned and ridiculed. It is they who are being sullied. It is their professionalism and integrity that are being brought into question. We on this side, Mr. President, are pleased. We are pleased with and we are proud of the unprecedented pace at which the SPARK program transitioned from being conceptualized by Prime Minister in collaboration with the then Finance Minister, Dr. Nigel Clark, to being packaged and then taken at an admirable pace through the public investment management and procurement processes, culminating, of course, in the award of contract to the enterprise contractor. What obtained in the case of SPARK, Mr. President, demonstrates, and it demonstrates in no uncertain terms, that we have the requisite capacity to undertake procurement procedures and deliver projects in a reasonable time frame once we muster up the resolve and fixity of purpose so to do. And so, Mr. President, I take note of some concerns that were expressed in the media just yesterday by one of our operators in business. And on this side, Mr. President, we are about collaboration, not confrontation. We're about helping all Jamaicans through policies that invariably constitute substance. We're not about arrogance. And so we are mindful that in our national economy, you will have divergent perspectives. You may have experiences that people, consumers, or the operators of businesses alike have that may cause them to feel that they are not existing in auspicious circumstances. But as I said a while ago, Mr. President,
Senator Bunting.
I had really anticipated that the senator was wrapping up, but since he needs some more time, I suggest, or I request, Mr. President, that he be given sufficient time to complete his presentation.
That request is made in your usual generous manner. Members would have heard the question. Those in favor? Aye. Just before you, yeah, okay, go ahead, Senator Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. President, and let me thank the senator opposite for his kind indulgence. Mr. President, as I said before, on this side, we understand and appreciate that persons' experiences and their lived realities will inform their perspectives and observations, and so we respect that. We equally know that views do not always converge. We are not a monolith here in Jamaica. But what I would say to the former president of the Jamaica Manufacturers and Exporters Association, and indeed other business persons and interests, is that the government duly notes concerns that are expressed, but the government would wish to remind that in a concerted, conscientious, and well thought out way, the affairs of the Jamaican state are being managed in such a way as to inure to their betterment as operators in the business community. The indicators speak to that and support that in very clear terms. I would say to business operators, Mr. President, that to the extent that the administration has just presented its 9th consecutive budget with no new taxes, that does a great deal to avert any anxiety or unease on the part of the business community. They have a degree of certainty in which they can plan and look forward to their operations and, of course, operate here in the country. With unemployment being at 3.5%, more people are employed, and what that means is that more people have disposable income. And people's disposable income is used essentially, yes, to support business operations, including that of the former JMEA president. So unemployment at 3.5% is extremely commendable, certainly when you juxtapose that with the 15% at which unemployment stood in October of 2013. Under the auspices of the independent central bank, Mr. President, inflation, as at January 2025, was in the order of 4.2%, essentially the lower end in the 4 to 6% targeted band. Inflation, as we know it, Mr. President, is a tax on consumers, and it is also a tax on businesses, because businesses also suffer the vagaries of inflation. And when you juxtapose inflation that stands at 4.2% in January against the 30% inflation that we had in this country in 1973, the 50% inflation that we had in 1977, and the 80% inflation that we had in 1991, it gives you a clear sense as to how moderate price increases have been in the country in recent times, and we wish to have it kept in that vein. Again, to close out that point, inflation is a tax on businesses in as much as it is a tax on consumers. $1.1 billion, Mr. President, has been made available to the Ministry of Labor and Social Security to provide individual grants of $20,000. That money will be spent amongst the members of the business community. So when individuals here in Jamaica receive their $20,000, in much the same way as persons who earned under $3 million last year received $20,000 by way of a reverse income tax credit. That money is not necessarily placed under a mattress. or put in the buttery. That money is largely spent in the national economy, and the operators of business enterprises like that operated by Mr. Omar Azan benefit from that injection, that expansionary use of fiscal policy, Mr. President. The $2 billion that has been made available through the Development Bank of Jamaica's venture capital program to support MSMEs, to facilitate sustainable growth of startups and MSMEs through the Boosting Innovation, Growth and Entrepreneurship Ecosystems project, and continue to support women-led initiatives, entrepreneurship training, including digital skills boot camps, are also expansionary fiscal policy at work, and it will inure to the benefit of the constituents of the Manufacturing and Exporters Association, Mr. Azan's colleagues. And so, Mr. President, the Finance Minister has also signaled that she, along with her colleague minister, the Minister of Industry, Investment and Commerce, will be collaborating even more closely with the MSME sector to alleviate the burden and vexing issue of interest rates that have still not come down far enough, notwithstanding the reduction, the successive reductions by the central bank in that regard. And of course, Mr. President, the business of opening bank accounts is also a vexing issue. And I am particularly heartened that the discussions and collaboration with the MSME sector will be had in that regard. So as I wrap up, Mr. President, the exemption, I believe, of certain works, goods and services from the generally applicable public procurement processes hold vistas to the business sector in the country. It will help them to more easily transact business with government and more seamlessly transact business with government. And a number of the hurdles, the bureaucratic hurdles that they would prior to have to confront and navigate would have essentially been removed. And with those words, Mr. President, and with the announcements that we saw on Tuesday, not least the establishment to come of a microstock exchange, capital equipment incentives, reduction in the bond to members of the motor industry from 100% to 20%, and of course, increase in the GCT threshold from 10 million to 15 million. All these things, including the increase in the personal income tax threshold, which over the life of this government has moved from $592,000 to $1.7 million at present, and will move subsequently, as announced on Tuesday, from 1.7 million to 2 million. Make no mistake, Mr. President, that represents, I gather, a 230% increase over the life of the government when you consider $592,000 to $2 million. And I also understand that that's a saving, cumulative saving of $42,000 per month to Jamaican workers who are benefiting from this reduction. So with those few words, Mr. President, with that brief intervention, I commend this bill and, of course, support its passage. Thank you, Mr. President. May it please you.
Thank you, Senator Morgan. Just 1 minute, please. Just in case we go a bit further than we had anticipated, the public defender, Mrs. Reed Cameron, King's Counsel, has paid a visit to us this morning, and I invited her. Stand up, please, public defender. I've invited her to join us in the chamber along with a senior member of our staff, Miss Pattison. So, I'm sorry, I don't have my glasses, Miss Palmer. So just want to welcome them to the Senate. And the purpose of the meeting really was to inform us that the Public Defender's Office has been operating for 25 years this year. So they will be celebrating their 25th anniversary. And we have a former member of staff of the Public Defender's Office in the form of Senator Apka Fitzhenley, who was at one time employed to the Public Defender. So she has come, the Public Defender has come really to bring us up to speed with respect to what they are planning to do for their 25th anniversary. So welcome, Madam, and we look forward to celebrating with you this important milestone in the history of the organization of the Public Defender. Senator Golden Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. President, and my heartiest congratulations to the Public Defender and her team in the celebration of this milestone. Mr. President, I'm going to be quite brief. I just have a few remarks and thoughts that I wanted to share. A year and a half ago, on the occasion of the debate, the State of the Nation debate in the Senate, I made some remarks then about extractive and inclusive institutions, referencing how our institutional system and our people engaged. And I had occasion to remind myself of the remarks that I made then as I reviewed this draft bill, because I have had my own experience as counsel for persons bidding on government projects and services, to recognize how unwieldy our procurement system has been, and in particular the kind of effort it extracts from business people who are seeking to engage with the system and to provide government services and goods. And so, Mr. President, though I am a big believer in systems and the fairness of systems and the need for systems to ensure that how we engage with the state is not randomized, is not biased, those systems, while needing to be fair, should also be accessible. And so I welcome, Senator Hill, these amendments to the Procurement Act, and I support them. You know, Senator Morgan referenced the focus when we seek to create systems and processes, and he spoke to the fact that he wished our focus was not so much on corruption and preventing corruption as it were on preventing inefficiency. And I want to join him in those remarks, because it is true that when we focus on creating a system that is resistant, or what is the word I would use, that can't succumb to corruption, we add levels in that system so that ordinary Jamaicans, ordinary business people, and I'm thinking particularly here of my favorite set of people in the country, the MSMEs, the micro and small and medium enterprises with whom I engage quite a bit in my own practice. We make it so difficult for them to engage with the system and to satisfy the kind of criteria that the Procurement Act requires them to satisfy, when really, if we concentrated on making the system efficient, and ensuring that the system, once engaged, could proceed quickly and without delays, without unnecessary hurdles, we would, in fact, be creating an environment that is far less vulnerable to corruption. Because what we do when we create unwieldy systems is attach a value to the hurdles that we put in those systems. And it's attaching that value to that hurdle that allows for the spend of a money to get over the hurdle. We create, in fact, a job for the person who is likely to be corrupt. If that hurdle didn't exist, there would be no value other than the person's salary at the end of the month. And so I welcome Senator Hill, the removal of these sector committees. I can't imagine why they were ever conceived of in the first place, to be quite frank. I long for the approach, and I do believe it is coming because I know my Prime Minister recognizes that we have some heavily bureaucratic systems that need reform. And so I long for this to take place throughout the government system. But I want to make one point, and I'm speaking, I think, to my many friends and colleagues who support the development of this nation through their service in the public service and the civil service, that it is one thing to have the system, but it also needs persons in the system who are willing to understand that while there are rules and there is fairness that must attend the system, there is also some common sense that needs to be applied so that we don't have businesses engaging with the government system and being subjected to what really ends up being for them a cost on their bottom line when we put them through additional hurdles. And I'm going to give you one quick example. This is not about procurement now. It's about a simple phone call. A phone call to a department in government to ask the department to attend on the Parliament. And I'm speaking about a matter that happened in a committee of Parliament. The Parliament made a phone call. The person at the other end of the line advised the Parliament that no, you can't just make a call, you have to send an email. The Parliament sent an email. When the Parliament sent an email, it was not responded to. Day 1, I called the Parliament. Do we have an answer? Day 2, I called the Parliament. Do we have an answer? They don't have an answer. Day 3, day 4, day 5, I had to make a call to the political directorate. We're trying to engage a ministry. Can you help us to get an answer? They then answered. The Parliament wrote an email. The point I'm making is it took 5 days to get a response to say that, yes, we acknowledge this invitation and we will be there. It took 5 days. That is not a function of the political directorate. That is a function of us as a people recognizing that we have a responsibility to our fellow citizen. It's a national call I am making for us to engage with our jobs in the public service system as if we are the person at the end of the desk receiving the service. And I'm making that call to my many friends. The public defender is here, and I see her nodding in agreement, I hope. My many friends in the public service throughout the attorneys' departments, etc., who I know fight every day to be responsive to the public, but have to suffer the bad name when some of the colleagues do not approach the work of the service in that way. And so I make that plea, Mr. President. My final remark is in relation to Section 44 of the current Act, which is proposed to be amended. And I just have some thoughts, Senator Hill, about this tender process and how the process is dealt with towards the end when you have a successful bidder and the procurement is cancelled. And currently, there are legitimate reasons set out in the Act as to what would drive a procuring entity to cancel a procurement process that has gone as far as identifying this successful bidder. And one of those is that there is the successful bidder turns out to be somebody who committed an act under the Corruption Prevention Act, and there are also some breach of the regulations where there are certain offenses they are accused of or have been convicted of. However, and I make this observation, and I might just stop short at the observation, that and the amendments to the bill don't actually contemplate what I'm saying. So I'm asking you, Senator Hill, to give it some consideration with your team at some other point. But and I believe this is a finance bill now, so it's really to communicate to Ministry of Finance. Section 41, rather, which is the section that cancels the procurement, tells you that the procuring entity must, when it cancels the procurement, publish a notice of the cancellation of the procurement in the same manner and place in which the original information regarding the procurement proceedings was required to be published. That, of course, is related to my comments about Section 44, because Section 44 is what tells you the things that would exclude a bidder in conjunction with, I think it's Section 42. So my question is, and I ask for some consideration for this, when the procuring entity, now let me just contextualize it. I'm a small business or a medium-sized business. I'm sticking with my people unit that I love, my business units that I love. When we go through a procurement process, we do so at cost to the business. It's a huge endeavor for a small business to engage the procurement process in the first place. But once we've done that, and we have now gone through the process, and the process has concluded with a successful bidder, I'm the successful bidder, and bam, the procuring entity, when I am now gearing up, my financing, everything in place, putting my people in place, because sometimes the small business has to do that kind of pre-work in order to be able to engage, to deliver the service or the product. Then I hear the procurement is cancelled, and the requirement that the procuring entity has to meet is that it must promptly publish a notice of the cancellation of the procurement as it did the original information regarding the procurement proceedings. But I have no idea, having made this investment in engaging this process and beginning to do what I need to do to meet my obligations, I have no idea why I'm cancelled. And I'm going to say the knowledge of that may be tricky. So I'm not here trying to, I'm not necessarily urging to a provision that would require the procuring entity to deliver reasons for the cancellation. But what I am asking is for the ministry to give it some consideration. Certainly, as was the case with the Minister of National Security, referenced by Senator Bunting, there are certain things you wouldn't procure, and maybe there are certain things that if you cancel the procurement, you would not wish to disclose why. But for those small businesses who have labored hard to put themselves into compliance and to put the necessary tools in place to engage the process and be able to meet the obligations that they engage. I just ask for some consideration to be given to whether or not that requirement to disclose a reason might be a little bit more protectionist for that type of business. So it is not something that is done willy-nilly, and I'm not casting any aspersions when I say that. Mr. President, I support this bill wholeheartedly. Thank you, Senator Hill, for your remarks, and thank you, my colleagues, for your attention. May it please you.
Thank you very much. Minister?
Mr. President, I ask for the second reading of the bill.
Thank you very much. The question is that the bill be read for a second time. Those in favor? Against?
An act to amend the Public Procurement Act read a second time.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill clause by clause. There are two clauses for which there are amendments. That is to say 2 and 21. Is that correct, Mr. Clark? Okay, so I'm going to put clause 1. Those in favor? Aye. Against? Ayes have it. I put the amendment to clause 2. Those in favor? Aye. Against? I put clause 2 as amended. Those in favor? Aye. Against? With the agreement of both leaders, I put clause 3 to 20. Those in favor? Aye. Against? I put the amendment to clause 21. Those in favor? Aye. I'm sorry. Yes, Mr. Bunting. I'm sorry.
On clause 21, could the minister just read the new paragraph 2(a) of Part A as amended? So just so to, it's a little difficult to follow the deleted word here and there. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, a mic for Minister Hill. The clause 21, the sub-paragraph 2(a). Just read it, how it would read after the amendments. So,
Senator Bunting, I'm sorry, you're asking for clarification in relation to the amendment to 21.
yes, so the amendment was just tabled today, and
it was.
I didn't really have a chance to go back to the clause.
So you want him to read it?
Just read it as
in
it
context.
would be amended.
Okay, fine. Senator Hill, you got that?
All right. And that's right. It reads as follows. For the purposes of the record, 2(a), Roman numeral 1, events, that's no change there. For the purposes of the paragraph, 1, it's you or Roman, you. Situation of emergency or extreme urgency are those that are A, arise as a result of 1, events not attributable to or foreseeable by the procuring entity, 2, Roman numeral 2, a disaster within the meaning of any enactment concerned with a disaster risk, and we take out or, and then Roman numeral 3, a period of public disaster or a period of public emergency proclaimed or declared under an enactment, or, now 4, a disaster or an emergency declared by the minister with responsibility for procuring entity by notice published in the Gazette after consultation with the head of the procurement entity. I see that I'm going to and.
Okay, I I'm
You,
clear.
you have it
Yeah,
clear now.
I'm clear now.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I put clause 21 as amended. Those in favor? Against? I put clauses 23. I'm sorry, 22. I put clause 22. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Ayes have it. The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with 4 amendments. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with 4 amendments. Minister?
And Mr. President, I now ask for the third reading of the bill.
The question is that the bill shortly entitled the Public Procurement Amendment Act 2025 be read for a third time. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Mr. Clark?
An act to amend the Public Procurement Act read a third time and passed.
Thank you very much. Minister Johnson-Smith?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it has indeed been an excellent day's work.
Yes.
Our work has been seamless. It has been efficient. It has been cooperative. I even agree with your word.
You're even putting words in her mouth, and she agrees.
I'm sure your colleagues who are online are wishing they were here to share in this spirit of camaraderie and cooperation. Mr. President, I wanted to not only wish the public defender and her team all the very best for this commemoration of their 25th year. I know that they will find ways to ensure the public recognizes the importance of the office and will ensure that it therefore has many more successes for the next 25. So I wish on behalf of this side. I also wish to just indicate, although we will go to the usual motion of adjournment for the benefit of those online and Senator Bunting, that we are in a budget period during which we don't usually sit, but we are trying to move the legislative agenda ahead, and accordingly, we are likely to sit next Friday to take the JTC bill, which has been tabled and long outstanding. But also on the 28th, the appropriations bill is scheduled to come to us. So I just want colleagues to be aware so they can schedule. I know it is not usual for us to be in a budget this active, but we are active and strong at the risk of of any points of order, but not in the spirit of today. Mr. President, I would ask that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I'd just like to associate myself with the remarks of support and encouragement for the Office of the Public Defender. I can't recall having had the privilege of personally meeting her, though I do recall on one occasion she had brought a motion to put me to take away my liberty for a period of time. So that's why I recall her name well, even though. But notwithstanding that, I want to assure her, not just of the opposition support, but of my personal support, because I've had a few run-ins with attorneys over the years, and it has never affected our personal relationship, or the organizational support that the office deserves. So I want to congratulate your office on 25 years and to assure you of the opposition's full support.
Oh, you did already. Just before we close, as well, Senator Bunting was telling me that Senator Brown, who no doubt is watching proceedings, wasn't feeling so well today, so we wish him a speedy recovery. The question is that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed. Those in favor? Against? The Honorable Senate now stands adjourned for a date to be fixed.
Once upon a time in a Caribbean island known for its rich culture and natural beauty, lived a group of people who were buried in piles and piles and more piles of paper. Papers spanning back to the start of time. Then came a bright